As the youngest and most renowned psychologist in the Huainan area, the fact that I have the ability to read minds, only I myself know about it. At this moment, the banquet is filled with people in fine clothes and with coiffed hair. Only I can tell that the female assistant following the president of a certain group, though smiling on the surface, is frantically complaining in her heart. I really can't stand working another day. Life is dull and boring, and work is killing me. Her boss isn't any less full of inner thoughts. Facing the business partner, he clearly still has a proper faint smile on his face. But in fact, his dissatisfaction is about to overflow. Is this guy's brain infested with worms? Seriously? If it weren't for his good father, who would be willing to waste words on such an idiot? Am I having such a hard time because I was the shoe road in my past life? I can't keep this conversation going. Can this world just mute all the idiots? They're so noisy. These celebrities from all walks of life. Their inner selves are much livelier than they appear. I raised my hand to press my temple, then picked up my wine glass and prepared to leave. But when I turned around, I saw a tall man in the hall, walking this way surrounded by a crowd. I knew this guy, and I knew him quite well. Oliver, the heir of the Gu group. He was young but held a high position, and was well known in the circle for his tough methods. If nothing unexpected happened, he would become the next person in charge of the Gu group. Of course, there was another reason why I was familiar with him. There was something else. He was my patient. No one could have imagined that Oliver, who seemed cold and distant to the outside world, was actually suffering from a rare disease. When he sat in my consulting room, gently lowering his eyes to look at me, this was how he described his condition to me. On rainy days, he leaned back against the chair, saying casually, "Whenever it rains, the urge to do something becomes incredibly strong. It's very hard to resist." Dr. James. He gave a soft smile. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but his voice dropped to an intimate, bone-piercing level. "You're a man too. Can you understand this feeling?" My hand holding the pen paused. After a moment, I put on a proper professional smile. I said gently to him, "You can be more specific. What kind of desire is it? What specific symptoms do you have when an episode occurs?" The patient didn't answer me. Oliver's two thin lips were tightly pursed into a straight line. Hearing this, he suddenly lifted his eyelids and gave me a cold look. "This won't do. Since you've come to see a doctor, you should trust me." I raised an eyebrow and smiled at him. "Mr. Oliver, I'm a psychologist, professionally trained to comprehensively assess and treat patients' physical and mental health issues. Anyway, you can totally—" Oliver suddenly spoke up. "I feel like kissing someone." "What?" My hand, which was making notes, involuntarily stopped again, and the black ink left a long mark on the paper. It wasn't because he suddenly interrupted me. It was because of what he said. Even with all my experience, I was truly a bit taken aback at this moment. I can't help but want to kiss someone when it's raining. What kind of illness is this? Suddenly, a soft chuckle reached my ears. Whether Oliver was really afraid I didn't hear clearly or did it on purpose, I didn't know. He leaned slightly forward, getting closer to the table and nearer to me. A hint of mockery settled in his inky black eyes. Then he gently opened his lips and said with a smile, I said, "When it rains, I especially hope someone would come and kiss me. I've always been a loner. I'm not the type who enjoys socializing." I ran into Oliver at a party. I should have pretended not to see him and turned away. But I didn't. On several previous occasions, in the consulting room, he seemed as calm as a stagnant pool of water. It seemed like whatever he said on the surface was exactly what he was thinking in his mind. There was not the slightest inconsistency. All of a sudden, I got kind of curious. What about now? What could he be thinking? A colleague passed by nearby and greeted me from afar. "Dr. James." I nodded in response. When I looked up again, I noticed that Oliver was probably drawn by the words Dr. James. He stopped in his tracks, stood still, and was looking at me. His seductive eyes were slightly curved, and his expression was half smiling. The moment our eyes met, my mind-reading ability kicked inches. He was thinking, Dr. James is here too. What a coincidence. Should I go over and say hello? The color of the suit looks good today. It really suits his complexion. Compared to the chatter of others, with their noisy and endless stream of complaining inner monologues, his inner thoughts are far too dull. I lower my eyes and smile, thinking I'm really bored out of my mind. I walk out of the banquet hall and just press the down button of the elevator. Suddenly, someone grabs my wrist tightly. Oliver had incredibly good-looking hands. His fingers were long and slender, the joints well-proportioned and distinct. The skin covering the phalanges was a cool-toned porcelain white, but such a delicate-looking hand had unexpectedly great strength, so much so that I instinctively tried to pull away with some force, but couldn't break free. I could only take a deep breath, look up, and calmly say to him, "What's wrong?" "Sorry." Even though he was saying words of apology, there was no sign of remorse on his face, and he didn't loosen his grip on my hand. "Dr. James?" he said slowly. "Why do you leave as soon as you see me? Are you avoiding me?" Faint voices of conversation came from around the corner of the corridor, and the voices were getting closer and closer. Someone was coming this way. I looked down at Oliver's hand gripping my wrist and frowned slightly. After all, I'm a well-known doctor in the industry. If people saw me getting entangled with my own patient, that wouldn't sound good if it got out. Fortunately, the elevator arrived at our floor at this moment. The elevator car door slowly opened. Oliver glanced at me, gave a soft smile, then pulled me into the elevator and pressed the close door button. "Mr. Oliver," I stared at the numbers on the display that were going down steadily and said in a cold voice, "You can let go of my hand now." Oliver was taken aback and let go of his hand. After releasing it, as if still a bit reluctant, he gently rubbed his fingertips. The movement wasn't deliberate. From the perspective of a professional psychologist, it was completely an unconscious action on his part. Patient, developing an emotion similar to attachment towards the doctor treating him. For me, it was by no means a good thing. I took a step back to create some distance between us, but Oliver slowly moved closer again and stood beside me. "Dr. James," he smiled, "you don't look too well." "Really?" I maintained the aloof expression on my face and took another step back. My back almost hit the cold rear wall of the elevator car. Oliver slightly raised an eyebrow and looked at me with interest, but didn't come any closer. He nodded and let out a soft mum. That was his response to my question just now. Moments later, he suddenly said, "Dr. James, actually, the doctor my subordinate arranged for my consultation before wasn't you. It was me who asked for the change. We had a..." His words were left unfinished. Suddenly, the elevator car jolted violently, the lights dimmed abruptly, and everything around plunged into pitch-black darkness. Oliver reached out to steady me. Then he quickly pressed the buttons for every floor and the emergency call button. After the elevator plummeted several floors at high speed, it barely stopped on the 21st floor. Having done all this, Oliver lowered his head, gently pushed aside the hair on my forehead, and asked softly, "Dr. James, are you okay?" I shook my head, but my vision went black and I felt dizzy in waves, and my legs seemed to lose all their strength. I could barely stand and almost fell straight into Oliver's arms. Like Oliver, I also suffer from a rare and hard-to-talk-about disease. Staying in a confined and stuffy space for too long makes me start to desperately crave the body of a same-sex person. The illness comes on strong, keeps gnawing at my sanity. I finally couldn't control myself and reached out, my hand trembling as I grabbed the hem of Oliver's clothes. Although I was still clenching my teeth tightly, not letting any indecent sounds escape my mouth. But my inner thoughts had already veered towards the direction that's not suitable for kids. I lifted my eyes and looked at Oliver's eyes, which were still beautiful even in the darkness. His eyes are so beautiful. The shape of his lips is so beautiful too. I really want to kiss him. I thought like this, and then I just did it. My hand that was holding the hem of his clothes moved up along his arm, finally stopping on his shoulder. Then I leaned in and gently touched his lips. Oliver seemed to freeze. I moved my gaze down again. He always wears formal clothes, looking like he doesn't want anyone to approach. I wonder what he looks like without his clothes on. I want to see. The light in the elevator car was too dim. I didn't notice Oliver's expression freeze. Then he silently raised his hand and buttoned up the top 2 buttons of his shirt. I seemed to have had a really long dream. In the dream, the room was quiet. In front of the French windows hung thick curtains with excellent light-blocking properties. There was a loose tie, a wrinkled shirt, and clothes strewn about in a mess. There was a man sitting by the bed. When I looked at him, he turned his head indifferently and asked me with a smile, "Are you awake? You're awake?" The voice in my dream gradually merged with the one in reality. I lifted my heavy eyelids and slowly opened my eyes. I found myself lying in a hospital ward, with an IV catheter inserted into the back of my hand. My friend put down the half-peeled apple in his hand, leaned over, and waved his hand in front of my eyes. "It's good that you're awake. The doctor said there's nothing serious. You just passed out due to overexcitement. Now that you're awake, everything's fine. How are you feeling? Is there anywhere uncomfortable? Do I need to call the doc?" "No need." I shook my head and smiled at my friend. "Didn't you say everything's okay? Why are you still rambling?" Then I asked him, "Did I pass out at the banquet?" My friend pouted. "Speaking of that, you really had bad luck. You just went to a casual reception, and yet you encountered an elevator malfunction. And in the end, you got so worked up that you passed out. But," he paused for effect, "guess who brought you to the hospital?" A name was on the tip of my tongue, but I still gave a negative answer. "I can't guess. Just tell me straight." "It was Oliver." My friend picked up the apple again. "Hey, why are you so calm? He's the second in command of the GU group. He personally got on the ambulance and accompanied you to the hospital. When I came, he was still waiting at the door of the ward. He looked really haggard, without a bit of color in his face. People who didn't know might think he was worried about you." I gave my friend a long look, then silently closed my eyes. But then the scene in the elevator started to appear in front of my eyes. My heart started beating faster involuntarily. I finally realized a fact that I wasn't too willing to admit. I had an episode in front of Oliver. Fortunately, my treatment methods had little effect on Oliver. During the 5th counseling session, I asked him if his urge to kiss someone on rainy days had improved. He just gave me a short 2-word reply, "No." I took the opportunity to say that I was at my wit's end and couldn't do anything more. I suggested that he'd better find someone more capable, so as not to delay his condition. He agreed. "That's great." I thought to myself, we won't have to see each other again in the future. Just then, Oliver raised his eyes, looked at me with a smile, and said, "Although the treatment is over, but I still hope to see you again in the future." What he said was a bit strange. What patient would want to keep seeing their doctor? It's like when a patient is discharged. A doctor would never say, "Hope to see you again soon." But ever since I was in the hospital last time, I've lost my mind-reading ability. So now I can't figure it out. And I don't want to bother thinking about what hidden meaning his words might have. I just nodded at him as usual and said, "I hope you get well soon." When the first heavy snow fell in City A, my name actually made it to the top of Weibo's trending topics. Along with Oliver's, no less. Of course, it wasn't for anything good. At that time, the surveillance video of Oliver and me trapped in the elevator was posted online, and the media blew it out of proportion. The crown prince of the GU group exposed, acting intimately with a man in the elevator of a certain club. Oliver's secret love affair suspected of being exposed. Gossip from the aristocracy. The next heir of the GU group remains unmarried. Could the reason be homosexuality? All kinds of eye-catching article titles, with detailed and seemingly well-founded narratives, made it seem like it was really true. Under the overwhelming public opinion, soon, someone dug out Oliver's so-called secret lover. That is my identity. The person in the video is James, a well-known psychiatrist in City A. Oliver seems to have some psychological problems. He was photographed going out privately to see a doctor several times. Come to think of it, could it be that the psychiatrist got involved with his own patient? If that's really the case, does this Dr. James even have the most basic medical ethics? His resume looks quite impressive. Could it all be just for show? The day after the incident blew up, the director of the psychological clinic where I worked called me into his office. The man sat behind the desk, pushed up his thin gold-rimmed glasses, and still looked very respectful. We've got some idea about the rumors outside. Dr. James, the contributions you've made during your years here are obvious to all. We have full confidence in your character. Regarding the negative public opinion spreading on the internet, the clinic has initially drawn up a public relations statement to respond to this matter. He handed me a document. Take a look and see if there are any problems. The statement was cleverly written. Instead of trying to prove my innocence following the direction of public opinion, insisting on emphasizing the innocent relationship between me and Oliver, it first clarified my sexual orientation, explaining that I'm not into the same sex. However, I smiled and said, "This part is wrong. Most of those rumors out there are false, but there's one that's absolutely true. I do like men." The director was a bit taken aback. "Dr. James, you..." Before he could finish, I nodded and stood up. "It's my fault that the clinic's reputation has been damaged. I'll submit my resignation letter to you later." After graduating from college, the reason I chose to pursue a postgraduate degree in psychology, to a large extent, he was closely related to someone. He had some mental issues, so I ended up studying a subject I wasn't interested in at all for his sake. Unfortunately, later he told me, "I think we might not be a good fit." Then he left everything here behind and resolutely went abroad. That's when I realized I was completely dispensable to him. Being sad was a totally unnecessary emotion. I stopped devoting any energy to that past relationship and instead threw myself wholeheartedly into my work. In just a few years, I became a well-known psychologist in the industry, but this couldn't change one fact. I myself didn't really like this job, so this public opinion was like a timely help to me. It was just the opportunity one had long planned for to leave my job. But I never expected. It's about my resignation. Oliver seemed to react more strongly than I did myself. I don't even know how he managed to find me. Anyway, by the time I realized it, he had already grabbed my wrist. The weather was getting colder. Oliver was wearing a black overcoat, looking as if he carried the chill of the wintry wind. His fingers dug into my wrist with such force that it hurt like hell. He was making such an offensive move right out in the open. If it were someone else, I'd have already lost my temper. Now that I'd left the clinic, I didn't have to keep that polite facade around him anymore. I turned to look at Oliver. Instead of trying to break free right away, I just asked calmly, "Mr. Oliver, do you have any sense of personal boundaries?" He seemed about to say something, but in the end, he obediently let go of my hand first. "Sorry." I turned to leave, but he called out to me again. "Wait, HM?" He raised an eyebrow. "After all, I've been waiting for you for so long. Mr. James, you can spare me a few words, can't you?" I stopped in my tracks, nodded slightly, indicating he could start with whatever nonsense he had to say. "I went to the clinic to look for you during the day. The person in charge said you'd already quit. Just as I thought. Useless information." I nodded. "Yes. Is there a problem? Was it your own will?" "Yes. If it's because of the rumors out there." He paused, took a step back, and leaned against the car door. "With Q Group's resources, handling a bit of public opinion isn't exactly difficult. You really didn't have to." I said calmly. I'm leaving because of my own reasons. I just don't want to do it anymore. That's all. Also, Mr. Oliver, I sneered, and my words became increasingly blunt. What I do is none of your business, isn't it? The moment the words left my mouth, I looked up into Oliver's eyes and couldn't help but sigh softly in my heart. So what if I leave? Why is he being so persistent? Me? Clingy? Oliver gave a sudden, disbelieving laugh and raised his hand to point at himself. I was taken aback. For a moment, I wondered if I had accidentally blurted out my thoughts. James, he straightened up. Don't you remember what happened in the elevator before? His voice dropped. It was you who grabbed the hem of my shirt first and wouldn't let me go. And here, he grinned wickedly, raising his hand to point at the corner of his lips. You made the first move. That night in the elevator. James, you kissed me. I guess it's some kind of self-defense mechanism of the brain. To keep its owner from dying of embarrassment when looking back later, it selectively forgets certain scenes. But now that he'd reminded me, my long-dead memories suddenly started to come back. In the suddenly malfunctioning, dimly lit elevator, I lowered my eyes and grabbed Oliver's sleeve. Then I tilted my head up, precisely found his lips, and kissed him. Maybe he didn't have time to react. He didn't pull away. Anyway, it was indeed me who kissed him. I stood there expressionless and indifferent, but in my heart, for the very first time in my life, I felt a bit of being at a loss. Yeah, I kissed him. So what should I do now? Let him kiss me back. In front of me came a chuckle that still couldn't be held back after being deliberately suppressed. You've taken all the advantages from me. You can't just leave me here without a word now. Can you? I looked up. So what do you want? Oliver's eyes crinkled, and he moved a bit closer to me. I've always highly recognized your professional ability. So, should I be your personal doctor? No, he smiled. You just need to stop avoiding me all the time. I don't really need a doctor. What I need is you. Anyway, since I was in the wrong in the first place, then I naturally have no reason to refuse Oliver's trivial request, even though this guy's approach clearly has a strong purpose. The first step of stop avoiding Oliver is to take him off the blacklist. There wasn't much to talk about in the first few days. Usually, Oliver would take the initiative to send me messages. His tone was like a boss's routine greeting to a subordinate, polite yet a bit distant. I would occasionally reply with a simple yeah. Then, one night, he suddenly said, "It's raining outside. Dr. James, what should I do then? Do you have any ideas?" His rare disease always flares up on rainy days. Although I've already left my job, I was a psychologist for several years, and Oliver was once my patient. Due to professional habit, I had a long voice chat with him in the middle of the night, talking about a bunch of treatment methods and countermeasures. It took a long time before he replied, "Okay, I'll give it a try." Then there was no movement in the chat box for a long time. So long that I thought tonight's conversation was over. But then my phone suddenly vibrated twice. "Are you free tomorrow? Can we meet up?" He came right out and said, "I want to see you." The way he was talking tonight was all mushy. If I wasn't sure he was messaging me, just looking at the chat history, I think he was talking to his partner in the heat of the honeymoon phase. I chalked it up to the adverse reactions from his illness, so I didn't look into it too much, and I even agreed to his request to meet. City A is a northern city, but winter comes slowly here, and the first snow always arrives late. I had my hands stuffed in the pockets of my overcoat, leaning against the car door, waiting idly to pick Oliver up after work. Not long ago, in the eyes of others, I was still Oliver's rumored boyfriend, so I just stood there, and I attracted quite a few glances, some obvious and some furtive. Oliver, however, didn't seem to care. After coming out of the office building, he got into my car expressionlessly right in front of everyone. While buckling his seatbelt, he accidentally touched the back of my hand. Then Oliver quickly pulled his hand back, reacting as if he'd been electrocuted. I turned my head in confusion to look at him. Our eyes met. Oliver pursed his lips and asked me, as a former psychologist, "Do you believe in mind reading in this world?" I actually have. I can't help but believe it. So I nodded and said, "I do." He sneered, looked away from me, and then murmured softly, "I believe it too. But for me, whether there's mind reading or not seems to make no difference. Because he paused here. James, you're really straightforward. Both on the surface and in your heart. You don't seem to like me much." I was startled and stiffly explained that I didn't dislike him. Even I myself didn't know why I had to explain this to him. And I was a bit worried about his mental state. What on earth is he babbling about? Has this episode been so long that he still hasn't returned to normal? Oliver suddenly raised his eyes, the corners of his eyes slightly red, staring straight at me. I leaned back, raised an eyebrow and stared back at him. But then a thought that startled me suddenly popped into my head. Could this guy actually hear my thoughts? Oliver didn't say anything more and didn't make any extra moves. He sat in the passenger seat and fell silent. I remembered that it was him who had suggested meeting today. So I put my hand on the steering wheel and asked him what he wanted to do with me or where he wanted to go. He was silent for a moment, then said softly, "I don't know where to go. I just want to be with you. Just drive around." I replied with the okay. The car hadn't driven far when Oliver completely quieted down. I sighed, stopped the car, and reached out to feel his forehead. It was a bit warm, but not feverish. When I got closer, I noticed a faint smell of alcohol on him. Although it was masked by the scent of woody perfume, you could still detect it if you sniffed carefully. I turned my hand and patted his face. "You've been drinking?" He opened his eyes, glanced at me, and then closed them again. I had to drink with the people from the client company. I couldn't refuse. Sorry.it won't happen again. No wonder he seems so off today, like a different person. But it's not a sustainable solution to let him keep sleeping in the car. I reached out and rummaged around Oliver's body for a while, then pulled out his ID card. Initially, I intended to take him to a hotel and get a room, but on second thought, I put the ID card back exactly as it was. Most of the hotels around here are properties of the Goo Group. If I take Oliver to the hotel reception to get a room and some nosy person happens to take a photo, it'll be the front page news again the next day. After much deliberation, I finally brought him back to my place. The curtains in the room were all drawn, and the light was dim. I closed the door with my heel and was just about to put Oliver down. He held onto my shoulder and suddenly said in a hoarse voice, "James, that William who came to the party in a Bentley with the license plate A88,888. You two knew each other before, right? You were together, weren't you?" I had been supporting him, but when I heard this, I suddenly let go and threw him onto the bed. "Oliver," I said, stiffly tugging at the corners of my lips, "dare you have me investigated?" I didn't. He reached up and grabbed my tie, yanking it down forcefully. I couldn't react in time and unexpectedly fell onto him. My lips even hit his face. I cursed under my breath, scrambled up from the bed in a sorry state, and looked down at Oliver. He smiled faintly. "Dr. James, you don't think you've been very discreet, do you? Your relationship doesn't need to be investigated. It's easy to guess. What's more, when the malfunctioning elevator door was opened that day, when he saw me holding you outside, he looked at me with such a fierce look, like I was some kind of enemy. He sees me as a rival in love. Your ex seems to still be hung up on you, James. I couldn't care less if my ex still has feelings for me. What really gets on my nerves is Oliver's endless babbling when he's drunk. And why is he so concerned about my love life anyway?" I was silent for a moment, took off my coat and hung it on the coat rack, then said coldly to Oliver, "William and I broke up a long time ago. Don't bother worrying about it. Forget it. Are you thirsty? I'll get you a glass of water." With that, I turned around and started walking out. But I only took one step and then couldn't move any further, because Oliver hugged my waist from behind me. I stiffened all over and pretended to be calm. Let go. He didn't let go. Instead, he hugged me even tighter, pressed his forehead against my waist, and his voice sounded hoarse, as if from a fever. James, you don't remember me. You don't remember me. You have no impression of me at all. Yet you were with him. Why? What exactly am I lacking compared to him? Why could you be with a scumbag but keep me at arm's length? I can hear what you're thinking in your mind. Oliver's voice gradually got lower, as if he lacked confidence, and it became so low that it was almost like the mumbling of someone half asleep. So what? I still can't figure you out. Sometimes I really hate my overflowing sympathy. When he hugged me from behind, there was a moment, just one moment, I thought he looked so pitiful with his red eyes, lowering his head and gently rubbing against my waist like a puppy. At that moment, the pity in my heart even exceeded the shock I felt when I learned that he might actually have mind-reading abilities. I removed Oliver's hands, turned around, stroked his head, and said in a tone like coaxing a child, There. You're drunk and your mind isn't quite clear right now. Get some sleep first. We can talk when you wake up. Okay. I closed the door and quickly walked over to the water dispenser. Only then did I realize that my heart was probably beating at least 3 times faster than normal. I tilted my head back and gulped down a glass of cold water, finally managing to calm myself down. I thought of the person Oliver had kept mentioning just now. My ex-boyfriend, William. I'm an orphan with no relatives. I had an accident during my junior year of college and was in the hospital for half a month. When I woke up, my whole body ached, and I also had traumatic amnesia. Some of the memories in my head were intermittent and blurry. Besides knowing who I was and still remembering my professional knowledge, I was confused about everything else. That's when William showed up. He busied himself by my side in the hospital for a long time. When I asked him why he was doing this, he laughed and said, You really don't remember at all. We're a couple. We've been together for a long time. My phone was smashed to pieces in that accident. He unlocked his phone and showed it to me. There were a lot of my photos in the album. He also said that he suffered from a very rare mental illness. He would become vulnerable and sensitive on rainy days and was particularly prone to getting depressed. It was after meeting me that his condition improved. So we got together. Although I had lost some memories, I did vaguely remember that there was someone who would have an episode on rainy days and was very close to me. And I was clearly aware that this person was very important to me. So I believed William. In the over a year that followed when I was with William, we always got along politely yet distantly. We didn't say affectionate words or harsh words to each other. More than a year later, I felt guilty that I had forgotten a lot of things about him, and it seemed that I didn't like him as much as he said I did. So, for the sake of his illness, I chose to stay in City A to pursue a postgraduate degree in psychology. But he just said, we might not be suitable, and then flew far away to a foreign country. Since then, we never contacted each other again. All the oddities, all the clues that I had overlooked, came crashing down on me like a tidal wave at this moment, almost suffocating me. The glass fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. I suddenly braced my hands on the glass table. When I asked William about his past, his hesitation and evasiveness, when I met Oliver at the banquet, he seemed to want to say something but held back. The unfinished sentence was, we used to, and just now he said, James, you don't remember me. You have no impression of me at all. Yet you were with him. Why? My heart was pounding wildly in my chest. What if William had lied to me back then? What if the person who was very important to me that I had forgotten wasn't him at all? I straightened my slightly rumpled shirt in front of the mirror, then pushed the door open and went back into the room. As soon as Oliver saw me, he came right up again, buried his head on my shoulder, and mumbled, Where've you been? Before I could say anything, he bit me on the shoulder without a word. I gasped in pain, frowned, and pushed him away. Are you a dog or something? Oliver was stunned for a moment. then slowly loosened his hold. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Why are you so heartless? We've had such a long relationship, but you can just throw it away like that. We finally met again, but you don't even remember me at all. I took over my family's company when I was a junior in college. That year, there was a problem with a project, so I flew abroad to deal with it. When I heard that you had an accident, I changed my flight overnight and rushed back. But when I got back to the country, I found out that you were already with William. When you were with me, you were sneaky and didn't dare to tell anyone else. But when you were with him, you seemed to want the whole world to know. When I came back, everyone told me that you two were together, but no one even knew that I had been with you. James," he let out a cold laugh. "Then what was that kiss between us in the teaching building back then?" A clap of thunder sounded, and it started to rain outside. Oliver stopped, suddenly reached out and grabbed the bedsheet tightly, and a suppressed gasp escaped from his throat. I stared at him in shock, and my mind recalled the day we met again. In my consulting room, Oliver, looking smart in a suit, told me calmly. I said, "When it rains, I especially hope someone would come and kiss me. Right now it's raining." I reached out and pressed the back of his head, making him lower his head. Then I looked up and kissed him. Outside, the rain was pouring down. Inside the room, it was deathly quiet. Apart from the occasional faint, intimate sounds, there was no other noise. It seemed as if even the flow of time started to slow down. When the kiss ended, I slowly pulled away. I glanced at my watch and suddenly remembered there were still some things left unfinished at the clinic where I used to work. So I got up, put on my coat and was about to leave, acting like a heartless jerk. Oliver called out to me from behind. He was disheveled, hugging the quilt. At a quick glance, he looked like I'd taken advantage of him. "James, you're leaving again. Are you getting addicted to getting something for nothing? Just stay here quietly for a bit." "Okay. I really have something urgent to attend to." "Fine. Then tell me first, what's our relationship now?" "What relationship? Do good friends kiss?" I was halfway there and then turned back. I leaned down and kissed him on the cheek. "Is this kind of relationship okay?" Later, William came to see me once. All he did was keep apologizing and explaining what happened back then. "I just happened to run into you and Oliver back then. I liked you, so I pretended to be him at that time," he said with a bitter smile. "But I didn't pretend for long. Staying by your side, I always felt like an imposter." I took a sip of the coffee in front of me and told him with a faint smile, "Not like you were." What I said was harsh and unforgiving. William came to see me, hoping to get my forgiveness to ease his conscience. But instead, he was retorted so much that his face turned ashen. This meeting ended up unexpectedly unpleasant. Oliver parked the car outside waiting for me. As soon as I opened the car door and sat in the passenger seat, he leaned over and showered my neck with tiny kisses. In a sober state, Oliver didn't talk much. There was only a cold sentence: "Don't meet him again in the future." After I quit my job, I didn't look for another one for the time being. So during this period, the main thing I did every day was just dating Oliver. As the end of the year was approaching, I heard that William's company was seriously short of working capital. The business couldn't operate normally and had declared bankruptcy. It might be acquired by the GU Group later. Without thinking, I knew this was Oliver's doing, but we had an unspoken agreement and neither of us mentioned it. On New Year's Day, Oliver, who was originally on a business trip out of town, drove for 7 or 8 hours to come back and spend the festival with me. Standing in front of the French window, I could see the electronic fireworks on the building of the skyscraper outside. They went off punctually 5 minutes before midnight. I watched them bloom suddenly and then fade away abruptly. For the first time in my life, I silently thanked the heavens from the bottom of my heart. Fortunately, the regret left when I was 20 could be made up for when I was 28. Even after going through a long detour, it was still him in the end. Things in this world are so unpredictable. full of ups and downs. Thankfully, there is someone who can accompany me for a while. The fireworks faded away. At the moment when the old year turned into the new, he lowered his head and kissed me. "Happy New Year, James."